flow it down and open up a whole bunch more property, but really make that piece viable and more attractive to developers. We decided, or you decided as a council, to move forward with using that money for streets, but we also took a look under your direction at, what would that infrastructure look like? We started design, we did some surveying, we found some things out we weren't aware of, so we were moving along in the design, and we recently were approached by a new company called R3. So inside your packet is also a memo from R3.
Right.
I think he's president, director, one of those.
Nicholas something.
Nicholas Green, he's the managing director. So quick 50-cent tour. R3 is a division of the legislature that was put together to take state legislated dollars and bring incentives to rural Oregon in communities of less than 50,000 and help close the gap and help incentivize building for developers over here. And what that usually looks like is, our upfront infrastructure costs, which are generally too high for developers to want to come in, but they also offer forgivable loans for houses. So for every house they deliver, there's an incentivized $20,000 that's given as a loan on the front end, and as soon as you get your occupancy permit, it's forgiven.
I have a question, because they said that there's a bill in the Oregon legislative right now. Do you know what the number of the bill is?
I did. I think it's 3939.
Okay, I just want to keep track.
And I'll double check and I can send that out if I'm incorrect, but I think it's House Bill 3939.
Okay.
And primarily what that bill is that they go in and they ask for project infrastructure money that's already set aside. They're looking at, I think they have Baker, Lakeview, John Day, and there was one more, but I think those were the three main ones.
Okay. All right.
So they approached us and said, hey, we want to work with some of your developers here in town. They've already approached a few of the projects that are ongoing and actually started back paying some of those infrastructure and housing costs. One of the examples he provided in his memo was True Avenue, which is over off of 16th Street.
Yeah. Right.
So they helped, my understanding, they're in the process or have recently signed an agreement to pay for the second half of the infrastructure as well as those $20,000 a lot incentivized.
Oh, okay.
Well, what would happen if this bill doesn't pass?
You said 3939?
3939. For us, really nothing at this point.
Okay.
I think the piece we're looking for is the momentum that it builds.
Okay.
So their first infrastructure bill was passed during the last short session, and that's where they started some of the subdivisions that he's referencing in his memo. I think he had said there's a 56 home one that they have going somewhere. I think it was John Day. And the one that's coming up is they have a whole bunch of infrastructure projects in other cities, but it seems as it's going through legislature that they're very excited about it. It seems to be producing houses, and it seems to be producing what they're looking for housing. That was one of the things that was attractive to this one is you have to designate 30% of the housing as what we're going to call workforce housing, because it's basically 120% of the average median income. So for us, that's an entry-level home of $330,000 to $350,000. Seems like a lot. Seems like a ton. But compared to what most of the houses are selling for nowadays, that's entry-level now. So they came. The first step in the R3 process that they discussed with us is that they're very excited about the Tessa Marie subdivision, just simply for the fact that it would set Grande up for meeting our housing needs for probably 10 years. So we did the housing needs analysis, and I was really going to lean on Mike here for most of that information, but he is out today, ill, so I wrote down some notes.
I have a couple questions though before you do that. So we'll still keep it to the same name as before, right? We wouldn't change it, or?
Developer usually gets the choice of naming the subdivision since it hasn't been officially platted.
Okay, I was just wondering because you mentioned that before. And also talked about, the different contractors. Does R3 plan on using, all three of them and others, or does he plan on just using one, or do you know?
We don't know the exact delivery method that he's going to propose. At this
Okay.
point, there's a
Okay.
few that are out there.
All
I
right.
know, I'm speaking from my point of view, and Robert can maybe choose. I'm not real fond of the idea of our complete housing for the next 15 years being in the hands of one developer. I don't know
Yeah.
a single developer in this area who can deliver that kind of housing
Right,
with that kind of diversity that we're
Okay.
looking for.
I guess when I
in-
read it, I thought he was just saying, these are the ones I'll talk to right at the moment.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, there might be more, there might be less.
yeah.
So when they came to Grande earlier this year, they utilized some local contacts
Right.
who were able to kind of weed out our regular developers.
Okay,
And those are the ones who got the first introduction into
because
the
they're the ones,
program.
okay.
because they're the ones doing something right now, correct?
They're
Okay,
the
Yeah,
ones
they're the
doing
ones
the
that
work.
doing all the building.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
So-
okay, gotcha.
They've gotten an insight into the project, and most of them got an opportunity to submit projects and say, here's what we're doing, here's what we need, those kinds of things.
Okay,
So at this point, there really wasn't a commitment one way or another of this is who I'm gonna work with, or this is what the delivery method's gonna be.
Did I miss something? I didn't see
I
developers.
didn't see developer names either.
Oh, yeah,
I
they-
missed it.
They're
it's on
Nick's-
page 1 up right
Yeah.
here, talks about,
Right,
talks about CB, construction, true
Oh,
construction,
and
and
others.
others. I was just wondering if he wanted to focus on one or
Oh, and
both.
see,
No.
to me, it's just they've held initial meetings, that wasn't.
Yeah.
I have just
that's
one
all I
other
read.
question. Is this the
Site
property, this is the
planners.
property that the owner wants to sell? That
Correct.
we already, okay, that's what I thought, that's the one that, he
Yeah,
still
we
is
get a
very
name
eager
on
to
this.
sell it.
Tes,
Right?
how do you say that?
Tessa Marie is how I've
T-
always
Yeah,
said it.
Tessa,
I believe that's the name on the shadow plan.
Tessia, you could say Tessia too.
So where did we come up with that name?
The developer
Originally
came,
platted.
came up with it a long time ago when they did the shadow plat. That's what they were going to name it at the time.
Gotcha.
Maybe after.
Which developer was that? That was the original one, right? They didn't,
That was
they backed
Fishback.
out?
Alan Fishback, who's the current property owner.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. But it refreshed my memory, because we talked about this. I thought they were like, they were two lots, they were owned by two different people. Is this the same
So-
thing we were talking about? Because this was the
Yeah.
ARPA grant thing.
So that's the gap.
And we approached them and said, are you still interested? And we got like crickets.
Yeah, so
So,
when we were doing the ARPA, there was two actual hurdles that we hit. The crickets were actually coming from the developers.
right,
Most of the developers were like, even if you close the gap so the infrastructure is right on the border of this subdivision, we can afford all of the utilities and infrastructure that's gonna be required to build out this subdivision. So most of the developers were out. The second one that we were looking, that you're probably thinking of the separate landowners, is to complete the infrastructure within this subdivision, we need to connect it to our system in a way that's meaningful for future development and also isn't going to cause us excessive maintenance costs. And that means we're gonna need a lift station probably down near Geckler.
okay.
And so we're gonna have to deal with some other property owners that won't necessarily see housing, but we are gonna have to get some easements and some other things just to get to where we're able to handle the infrastructure that we built for this subdivision.
So unless I missed something, I mean, that was, we kind of left it at that point because there wasn't any kind of interest or commitment from any developer. And we didn't want to go throw a ton of taxpayer money into something and
Have it sit.
potentially just set that, you know, for
Right.
years and years and years and not be utilized. So,
That's,
so this is, okay, right. So now we're saying we have access to
Well, that'll be,
some state funded, okay,
yeah, so that's where we're heading.
okay, all right.
So, following their introduction, they came over and they met with city staff, and we started discussing, what does this program look like? What do we want to do? And they came forward and said, we're interested in partnering, a public-private partnership with you. So again, this is a public agency, and they would basically act as a mediator or an oversight. They have professionals under contract, which include engineers, planners, architects, all of those on staff. They said, we're very interested in Grande, you guys are growing. What they want to do is come forward now with a pot of money where we can do the three things that they kind of outlined were the first step. And that is verify that the property is available and affordable. Two, secure the paths to build the infrastructure that we need, being easements and landowner agreements. And the third one, I'm spacing because I was talking about it too much. Third one was create a design of the infrastructure with their engineers.
yeah.
So They would fund that. We don't fund any part of that. The only part of our piece of that would be our staff time to collaborate with those professionals. And once we're through that point, the current bill that is going through legislature would be either approved or disapproved, and we could see kind of what the momentum was looking like. And then their interest would be to include us in possibly next short session's bill, a similar infrastructure bill for us, where we get those state funds that come down to build infrastructure.
That's if the 20 million that they have in the current bill is turned down. They were talking about doing a separate standalone, which they've done for other jurisdictions for La Grande.
And then
So-
essentially, the
Okay.
state then would be funding the
Um,
infrastructure side of this. Nothing comes out of our pockets.
That's part of what we have to figure out, depending upon what funding does become available and what the package looks like.
What it has.
Okay.
It might be, we're gonna get kind of down in the weeds. Can we let Kyle kind of get through the whole thing and we
Yeah,
can
okay,
circle
sure.
back? Because a lot of the questions that are being asked, I think he's gonna touch on some of those.
Okay. Proceed, Kyle, then.
All right. So with that piece, they've given us a few tasks, if, approved, to move forward, that we would work with landowners to try and look and see if these easements are a possibility, if we can come to an agreement, or if we're just a hard no. They've volunteered to take a look at the piece of the availability of the property and what the mechanism of delivery of that would look like. And then they have also provided their professionals at no cost to us to start with that design, to start with, kind of one of the tools their architect delivers is basically a walk through the neighborhood where you can look at the different housing designs they have. You can go on a housing tour, so you'll see kind of what kind of development they want to deliver. And then, as Robert said, depending on how the bill goes, whatever funds are approved, they could either come to the table and say, here's the amount of money that we have to work toward placing that infrastructure, and this is the delivery mechanism. They aren't at any point promising it's gonna be $0 out of our pocket, but when we were having the discussion with the ARPA funds, as you're remembering, one of the hard parts that we had was we're not ready to throw all this money at something that's just gonna sit there. The good piece with R3 is they have momentum behind them, because they're eliminating the number one hurdle for every developer that we run into. We have open lots, but nobody can afford the infrastructure and keep money in the dirt, so to say. Basically, you're delivering lots at the cost of what it took you to put in the infrastructure, so all your money's in the house. So you can't sell lots and make money, you're basically just delivering dirt. This way, they're getting dirt for almost at cost, and now there's money in it. So every developer I know is excited at the prospect of, I can make money on the dirt and the house. So this is my kind of model. So for this work session, I think the point is to come together and get consensus from council that we're moving in the right direction to follow up with most of these, to get that design done through this program, and to continue to pursue this possible funding mechanism through the state legislature.
Some other pieces, as we were talking with them, because that was one of the questions that I had was, what are you asking the city council? We're looking to write in a check, what exactly is it? And they said that they've had a number of different experiences with communities that are a little bit different. I believe it was John Day has urban renewal for housing, and they brought some dollars to bear from that. Again, not advocating that was just an example. They talked about wanting to make sure that they can influence and control the type of housing development that is occurring, to make sure that it's something that is correct for the community. And one of the models is to where they buy the property, own the property, and then work with the developer to then come in and build, and then the lots are sold as a way to make sure that the mix of housing fits what we're trying to solve with the public dollars. And, because for them as well, it's too early to say, we're gonna use this developer, we're gonna do this, and this is what it's all gonna look like. But what they did say was that, and as Kyle mentioned, this is likely going to be something where there will be multiple developers that would need to be involved to do segments of it. And they have, I think, $1 million right now that they were looking of using portions of that to do the work that we're talking about, essentially using those funds in anticipation of either then being able to act with the additional 20 million that they're hoping, or to do a separate standalone bill. And they've had really good feedback. It's been and is a successful program. You know, housing, particularly workforce housing, is a very high priority for the state and the communities right now. And to have someone that will come in and do a lot of this upfront work with no expectation that we write them a check if nothing ever happens at this juncture for that, I think is kind of a no-brainer to me. And then as we get farther down, with the design, we'll know the cost, we'll know do we have, and we've got some thoughts on how we can get the access that we're hoping to get. And then be at a point where we know what the legislature does, and then to come back and say, okay, here's where we are, this is what we want to package, and essentially just away we go from there. But, you know, we didn't want to tell them, go for it without engaging the council. And
Appreciate it.
that's kind of where we are at this juncture.
And this area is not in the floodplain.
No.
No, yeah.
And have you talked with anybody in John Day or anything to see how it's working with them?
I have not.
I was just wondering.
I've talked to some people who are in the program in Baker.
Okay, in Baker then?
Generally speaking, the initial feeling is the same that I know I felt, and I think Robert felt was, what's the catch? It's too good to be true.
Yeah, okay.
And I've yet to found a person who said they found a catch. You know, I think if you were looking at housing for a Portland and limiting that 30% to the mean average income for Oregon, it may be a catch for there. Because it would be hard for a developer who could sell a $500,000 house to come down to that 330, 350 mark. The only other catch or slowdown was put on the developer of making sure that they develop within 5 years. And so from the city's perspective, hey, we get new housing within 5 years, that doesn't seem like a drawback for me. But
So, I mean, 34% of this has to be, you know, multifamily, townhomes or multifamily. I guess 25% multifamily,
Family, yeah.
14% townhomes.
so those
How
are,
does that fit with our housing needs?
that is the housing production study that we did. So those numbers came right out of our housing production
That's
study.
what I thought.
That's where they developed those. There will be no requirement on type of housing that would be put in, other than that 30% must be workforce housing. That's the only thing, and it has to be rented or sold to workforce housing. So if somebody built a house and turned it into a rental, they would need to set a monthly rental price that fits.
What is workforce housing? Can you define that?
They basically, it's basically 120% of the average Oregon income. So purchase prices are around $330,000.
Okay, that's what you're referencing when you say the.
Yeah, that's the 30%. They could
Sorry,
build.
okay, I missed that. That is our own plan that dictates
Yeah.
that 35% of that roughly is
Because
of
some,
those two
but
types.
some of these are townhomes, so I'm assuming, but these, only the townhomes were back here though, right?
Well,
Yeah,
that's,
This is a sample though.
that's,
just a
that's,
sample.
that's a sample.
Okay,
They're just, so part of what we wanted to put together was kind of a here's what it can
Okay.
kind of look like. They have tons of all
Okay.
ready to go design houses, plexes, and in some cases, what they've done is they've essentially said, this is the style you are going to build in this, for this segment. So I'll just call it a subdivision.
Okay.
For this part of the subdivision, this phase or whatever, you're going to do these 7 floor plans, and this is what they're going to look like. And then they take that, those floor plans and they're modeling, and they can actually do like a virtual drive through the neighborhood, overlaid on an actual piece of ground to show this is what it would actually look like, which is a really cool tool
Yeah.
that helps to say, okay, here's what you're buying. You know, this is what you're supporting, this is what it's going to look like. We're gonna have this many of this type of house, this many of that type of house. Here's the price range for these that we're looking at. Here is the incentive for the developer to make that happen. So everybody knows going in exactly what the parameters are.
So that's what I guess that's kind of what I was going toward is, are these gonna be sold individually then to people? Or are they, because some of these, if they're duplex or something, are you gonna buy your share of the duplex? I mean, I didn't understand that part of it, because I thought they're gonna be single homes more than,
Is that what they're planning? Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I mean, this
No,
plan
no.
doesn't have it.
So there's gonna be a strong mix of,
Yeah.
of
Okay.
types of housing. So a duplex may be an investment property for somebody who rents out both sides.
Okay,
Townhouses can be
Gotcha.
sold individually. There's going to be single-family housing. I think the beauty of this model is not only are you hitting upon those, you know, those entering the housing market for the first time, but we'd have the option to actually build the homes of the hospital directors who have no place to buy a house because they can't find one that fits what they want.
Right.
I mean, that's the beauty of this subdivision is that you can pick what those houses and sizes and,
Multiple choices.
right, I understood all that, but I thought down in that area, I thought high-end housing probably wouldn't fit there very.
Could you, I'm so sorry because I'm new to this, could you just explain the plots or the lots one more time to me where they're lolocated? So we've got Cove Avenue.
Yeah. so you got
Is it-
Cove Avenue.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
It's kind of in this little,
It's this green area right there. So Pepsi plant is right here, kind of where that gray line goes flat.
gotcha.
This is the green, this is
So
Cove
this is like
Avenue right there.
over near Locust Court and,
Yeah, right off 25th, kind of
Okay.
near Empire Drive.
yep. Okay,
So
thank you.
R3 is
I was
an
gonna do it on the
actual
other side of the
government
freeway.
agency. They describe themselves as an intergovernmental agency.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes.
that's a better way to describe it. They're tasked to take government funds and utilize them. They're not a for-profit or anything like that, so they're delegated legislative funds for a direct purpose.
Okay. I haven't heard anything that says we should say no.
I haven't either. I mean, when I read this, I thought, well, it sounds like a good deal. I guess my concern is with the government, with the state wanting to cut all this money right now.
That's-
That was the part that bothered me.
Yeah, that's one of their concerns as
Too,
well,
yeah.
is that they were a little hesitant, not knowing.
Yeah.
And I think the problem everybody's seeing in the legislature right now is just the huge mass of bills that's
Bills,
coming
yeah.
through that,
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing minutes that they're burning through these bills, so. 3939, this housing bill, which I believe that's the number, it's already been through a public hearing, it's already been through committee, it's at the Ways and Means
It's at
Committee
the way-
already.
As of the 15th, it was at the Ways and Means.
So it's
Okay.
moving through, and other than a few public comments, there was no negative comments from the legislature. Everybody was more than happy to want to move forward with this program.
I mean, I know that's a state issue, I mean, a strong one of housing, but I just didn't want to see us get started and then have it, oh, sorry, we don't have
Well,
the
it would
funds.
either happen or not, right?
Right,
If it
yeah.
doesn't get funded, it just wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't
So
happen,
kind
yeah.
of no
Yeah.
skin off our.
But you said that this company would would buy the property?
They could,
They could,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, there's it really comes down to, for each community, what's the model that makes the most sense? And, you know, as Kyle kind of started out with, we don't think there's a developer that could come in to do the entire thing
Right, that makes sense.
in the timeline that you'd have to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's very likely it's going to have to be more than one developer. And then the question becomes, you know, how do we, you know, how is the property secured? Who purchases it? What does all of that look like? And, you know, that's what they're the experts in figuring out how to do. And so where we are right now is they're willing to spend money on getting this thing going. And, you know, I think this is a really really good discussion, and it kind of, this is pretty much the same conversation that we had with them at the staff, trying to get these things figured out, and, at every turn, it was, good positive feedback in terms of strategies for doing these things, and it really gets tailored for the community.
Because we went down the weeds again, Kyle, did we cut off your?
No.
Okay, I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
we can be in the weeds now, this is fine.
We considered what would happen, I mean, if you're talking 150 houses needing to be built in 5 years, that could feasibly completely tie up 2 or 3 of our developers, for a substantial length of time, which would make them unavailable for other projects in the community. I mean, I think that's one ramification of something like that we should consider, just, given the number of developers that we have available in this area.
Well, I think that would really be the developer's decision as to whether or not they wanted to spend the next years doing this type of a project. I don't know, I can't speak for them, but I don't know that they necessarily would say no to something that they have a high likelihood of getting the return that they're looking for. I know all of them like to keep busy, and if there's an opportunity for them to come in and do, 50 houses, and they know that, and they've got a workforce that is capable of doing that, and they've got the funding on their side, and this solves the other gap of that equation, I think it's a, an awesome opportunity. And, we don't know if that would mean that you'd have to have a developer from the outside come in and do a portion of this, whether that would mean an outside developer would come in and do the work that that developer would have otherwise done. We have right now, depending upon the project, and we saw this with school, with some of their stuff, is, what is the capacity that we have to do some of these projects? So I think it's a real concern, David. I don't know that it's something that we can influence to any great degree.
But I think it's just good to consider. I mean, the other one is, what happens to our housing market if you flood it? I mean, we're talking, that's 148 units. But if some of these are multifamily units, you might have 200 or 250, occupant, kind of places there. Like, what does that do to our market?
There's a need.
Is there? I mean,
There is.
do
There is.
we
Our
is there
housing
an
needs
immediate
is-
need for 200 or more,
And we've got.
We don't have 200 homeless people in LeGrand, I don't think.
But,
But I think you have 200 people who are ready to move up or living with their parents or,
Yeah.
and most realtors you talk to have a list of 20 who are looking to buy today if there
Yeah.
was a house.
and
Yeah, I mean, I
can't-
guess that was my other question is, what does that look like? Can we get, obviously you don't have numbers until you look at how they configure that multifamily, because I mean, in theory, you could have an apartment complex on this, what would be 2 single-family home lots that might house, 30 or 50, couples or something. And so I just, again, you want to consider all sides of that, because this forces a time frame on it, right? 5 years. So you're forcing a time frame on it. It's not like any other development where you can kind of develop it gradually as the need arises and as people buy lots and build homes. And so that's a pretty sudden change.
We've had people with the hospital
market there.
turn down offers and not move here because they couldn't find a place to live. They've also had that at the university.
Right, I'm not doubting that, but
It's
again, I
there.
think you just want to consider numbers, because you can really mess with a housing market. And you can mess with existing home prices for people who are trying to sell their homes.
Yeah, because
things like
I mean,
that.
the realtors might have a list of people who want to buy a home, but then that means they're vacating something else.
Right.
Possibly.
So,
Or getting out of their parents' house.
yeah, either or, yeah.
I mean, you said LeGrand's growing, but we're not. Like, we
But
haven't
this is
grown.
And this is, Dave,
This is our
part-
huge
this-
barrier,
to-
is
The conversation that we're having right now is the conversation that we had when we did the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy. And what that told us was we are heavily rent burdened. We have people that are spending much more than they can afford on houses. And the biggest reason for that is the lack of housing stock. And we know that this will not solve all of our demand over the next 20 years. We know that it won't solve all of our demand over the next 10 years. But what we do know is this is an opportunity to actually come in and make a real difference in the housing stock. And at the end of the day, the market is gonna determine whether or not the rest of those houses get built, if they do all 148. And if not, are there any consequences associated with that, which we'll know farther down the road. But I think that taking the approach that we don't want to, or we're concerned about what adding additional housing will do to the housing market is far outweighed by what we're hearing from employers, which is we have people that won't come because they can't find a place to live. And so it's not just, I'm selling my house next year. So I'm very sensitive to the idea of that. But I think that we're approaching this particular project with a primary focus on that workforce housing that we know there's a shortage and that we want to do that. And frankly, I think bringing some of the housing costs down in our community is a good thing.
Right, please, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not arguing that that's a bad thing, that's not what I'm saying.
No, I get it.
What I am saying is, we need to understand the full ramifications of this, because this is a bit unnatural if you're forcing a 5-year. We haven't had 150 or 200 homes built in this community, what would that be, 15, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna force that within a much more truncated time period, and I just think we wanna wrap our heads around what are all of the consequences. It's a good idea, right? I mean, we all want housing, we know we need housing, but again, I just wanna make sure that we fully understand what could be unintended consequences of this sort of a thing. Okay, so not opposed to it, not saying we don't need it,
Right.
saying, do we have a sense of how much that need is? And potentially, like, let's get a top number. Because again, you start throwing apartment complexes and multifamily in here, and now you may be talking numbers well in excess of that 148 in terms of actual family dwellings that we could be placing into the community in a 5-year period. So it might be nice to just have an idea of what is the actual demand in a 5-year period that we think.
But
it
do
would
we
be.
have to, do they have to build all of that in a 5-year period?
That was, yeah.
I thought that was,
Yeah.
that
So
was what we said,
that's
right?
been the model that has been.
That's the model
spoken
they
of.
use, but does it have to be, because you said if it's not selling, they probably won't be building, right?
And that's who owns the property, who owns the infrastructure, how does that deal come
Right.
together? Because, a lot of the developments they're doing now are gonna be 20 to 40 houses, not 150. So talking to Nick, he discussed this being a home run because it kind of fills our needs for maybe the next 10 years, even though it only fills 5 years of what our housing needs analysis says we need. Because our housing needs analysis says we need 200 homes in the next 5 years.
Okay.
I think one of the concerns, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine.
One of the concerns I have is selling properties or lots to folks who just want to rent. Because when I look through rentals in the Grande, there are so many rentals that are just not taken care of. And I want to know if there's any way that the city can limit what goes to renters versus primary residencies in this project. Is that
I don't know.
is that a Mike Boquist question?
I don't think you can, I don't think you
Yeah.
can legally do that.
Okay,
Unless you want to buy the property and own it as a city, which we absolutely do not want
no,
to do.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah, yeah, it is dictated by what the land development code says the use of the
Okay.
land can be done. And that's where you get into the density and how much density you can have there.
To me, that's
Um,
unfortunate.
But I do think part of the feedback that we'll give to them is for them to talk to what is the impact. I think there's two impacts. What is the impact to bringing these in and building all of these at the same time? And also, what happens if you're not able to actually get them all built?
Or sell them. I mean,
So the
Yeah.
city's role, I mean, they're helping us put in basically infrastructure.
that's all, yeah.
It's kind of the developer's problem of getting it built. I mean, and that's been, I mean, housing has been, I think, our number one issue for
Mhm.
10 years. This is just a great thing to be able to solve that, or at least put a dent in it. So am I understanding it right, that we will get help putting in this infrastructure, which will help developers to pencil it out that it makes sense for them? Yeah?
Yep.
And if
I
they-
don't see,
yeah.
we don't have any problem with that.
Yeah, I think I think this sounds great. I think it sounds great, yeah, again, I just want to understand, when you said we've tie a 5-year time period on this, like if you're tethering developers to that, saying, you've got to develop this within 5 years, that's the piece I want to understand, is what does this look like? And are there unintended consequences if we glut the housing market all of a sudden with a number of homes that we haven't seen in a much longer period in the past?
Now, I hear
Right,
what
I
you're
mean,
saying.
and prices coming down is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is bad for anybody who's trying to sell their home,
That's right.
right? So you just, you don't want to try and control that, but municipal decisions can create huge waves in things rather than a little more natural, more gradual transition, which is where the market can respond more gradually. So that's just the piece that I want to wrap my head around. So I'd like to know more about what their time frame and what restrictions would be on developers, or if they can allow it so that developers can kind of develop and sell the homes as the demand is there. Is that make sense?
I think that's fair. So what we will do next is we'll tell R3 that the council is supportive of moving forward, and that, of course, as they already know, there's a lot of questions
Right.
along the way, and we'll make sure to add the discussion of, what are the practical implications of doing this on this timeline, both in terms of including, are there sufficient developers to actually make it happen and do whatever other development that we have going on in the community? For that 5-year period, how does that really impact the housing market? And to the extent possible, do we have, that level, do we, because we've done a study that says, here's what our need is. What we don't have are people that are willing to come in and just start building a bunch of spec houses based on that. I think this is something that will put us in a situation where it's more of in between build on demand versus spec house. Because I don't think that we're gonna be in the spec house business ever here.
So, sort of in the weeds, will we require any green space or park
That's what I was
or?
just thinking.
So
I
it'll
know
have
we've
to meet
talked
all of
about
our
that.
land development code, so that would all be part of this first step, where they're going to deliver what they would envision as a plat of what the subdivision looked like. And even in a short meeting, they were always talking about, oh, there's a nice place for a park, there's a nice place for a path, things like that. So they're definitely, it would be good for you to see what other subdivisions they put together, so you can kind of see the idea of what's behind their design, but.
Because there's not green space in that area in general, other than like cabs.
Would we be able to see the sample of what they propose and approve it, or do we not do that, or what?
Yeah, I think that would be after the next step is that you would get a model delivered, and then that's
And
where
then
they
we
would
would-
come to you and say, this is what we want to build.
Oh,
And you guys can take a look, see what they're proposing, and actually get a feel for what the housing development that they envision for that area looks like.
Okay. That would be good.
Current property owners are amenable.
For the current property where the subdivision would go, yes. We're still working on, well, we haven't really done any work on the easement piece. Most of those were very light treaded conversations back for the ARPA times, but
Time to revisit it.
we've been trying to find ways to leverage so that we can get what we want, so.
This is a really random question. When they are looking into this stuff, do they consider things like wind and how that's gonna impact housing out there and what kinds of things might need to be put up, like tree barriers or whatnot to help protect the homes out there? Because I used to live out in that area and it's terrible.
I was thinking snow too.
Yeah, it's really, really awful. It drifts
It
into
would be,
those.
yeah.
it does.
It's so random, I know.
I think there's some, I
That's
know
actually
that,
good.
in the short meeting where we talked, there was discussion of, the proximity to the interstate being one of the things, most new
Noise.
developments is they don't wanna see the noise or the sites that come with the interstate.
Right.
So, yeah, there were some discussions of what that looks like. They
Okay.
seem to be pretty well thought out designs, and
Okay.
I don't know that they're thinking about wind though. Like, people don't really realize the
That's
amount of
really,
wind.
You don't realize
it's
it's
around out there.
That was number one on my list when we looked to move out of Island City.
Yeah.
Is we have to get out of wind channel.
Yeah.
So I think anybody who's lived in that area does think about wind.
Yeah.
Except there are a lot of
They
people
can't
who
help
live
but think
there.
about it for about 7 months out of
Well,
the year.
until we
Yeah.
realize.
No, I think that a lot of people built, look at all those houses that
Oh,
were built
that's-
out there.
that's true.
And they went out there knowing what the wind was like.
Yeah.
This is thrilling. This is absolutely thrilling that we have potentially a path forward
Right.
to accomplish something that is
That we
monumental.
need to have.
This is a generational type of impact on a community like ours, and I'm thrilled with it. I just want to make sure that we understand again that the time frame is the only concerning part to me, because it is our responsibility. As much as we know there's need for housing and need to lower housing costs, we also have to consider the needs of the person who bought their home in 2024 and wants to maybe sell it in 2030. And if a decision we made, decreased the value of that homeowner's home, who's a retiree and fixed income by, a significant percentage, we have to consider all sides of that, so.
Okay,
But don't you think, okay. Is there any other questions? If not, I guess we can. Any questions? Because my other comment was, I think the 5-year period will just take care of itself, because if the developers see that nobody's buying, nobody's interested, they're not gonna keep building. Right? You have to have people willing to buy the house.
Well,
after
but that's
the
what I'm
development.
saying, if you're forcing a time frame, if you're making a developer commit to
But are you-
building a certain number of homes,
are they
forcing
making
time
and
them-
frame,
that's,
no
that's,
choice.
that's the piece
That-
that we need to determine,
Correct.
which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah,
if you don't do everything, what are the strings that are associated and what are the consequences? Because that was part of my concern from the city's standpoint, is if we get, X dollars to build the infrastructure, the city main infrastructure that has to go in, as part of the package that is gonna create X number of
Right.
houses, and we get Y instead, does that mean that there's a clawback where we then have to write a check for stuff that we haven't done? So
Right.
understanding,
okay.
That is a good question.
understanding, there's an expectation, if you're given a bucket of money to build 140 units worth of housing, if you build 110, is that close enough to not have to give any money back? Is it, you need to have an extension in time? What is the final package? And we're quite a ways away from that, because we can't get to that conversation until we have a clear path forward, which includes what it's gonna take to get the access easements that we need to get the
Right.
infrastructure down.
Yeah.
What is the design, all
So
of
that
those,
makes-
so
Okay,
stay tuned.
yep. Okay, so you guys will, you know our position then?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions?
Two thumbs up.
Okay.
This is exciting.
Then I guess I can adjourn the meeting.